You can eat in the garage with the dogs. Adults are talking. Forks froze. My father, who had been mid-chew, stopped, his jaw slack. My mother let out a tiny, nervous titter, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. 20 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, a few neighbors my mother had invited to witness her magnanimity, just sat there. They watched as my brother, Connor, pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the door leading to the garage. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my 8-year-old son, Leo. Leo's crime had been a burst of excited chatter about his new Lego set, a story that had risen slightly above the general holiday din. He had knocked over a small, empty water glass in his enthusiasm. It didn't break. It just tipped. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and for the last 11 years of my life, I have been the invisible wallet. I have also been the invisible landlord, a fact my brother seemed to forget as he sat at the head of a table I technically owned, eating a turkey cooked in an oven I had paid to replace, in a house whose property taxes I paid every single year. They didn't know I was prepared. They thought I would just take it, like I always had. They were wrong. If you've ever been the designated black sheep, the one who is simultaneously leaned on and looked down upon, you know the feeling. It's a strange, hollow ache in your chest. If you've ever had to choose between your family and your own sanity, hit that like button. Because you understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. They thought I was just a head nurse, a boring, practical cog in the machine. They forgot that a good nurse knows precisely where to apply pressure and exactly how to cut off the circulation. My grandmother, Eleanor, left me the farmhouse. It was the only thing of real value she had, and she gave it to me, not my parents, for a very specific reason. They are soft, Maggie, she had told me, her hand, thin as a bird's claw, resting on mine. They don't know the difference between a hand up and a handout. You do. Don't let them ruin this place. I was 25, fresh out of nursing school, and I had promised her I would protect it. When she passed, my parents were adrift. They were renting a small apartment, and Connor, then 18, was still living at home, already cultivating his persona as a misunderstood genius who was too brilliant for a traditional job. They came to me with a proposal. Just for a year or two, Maggie, my mother had said, her voice laced with that carefully practiced helplessness. Just until we get back on our feet and Connor finds his path. A year or two. That was 11 years ago. I didn't charge them rent. It felt wrong. It was their childhood home, too. I thought it was the right thing to do, the decent thing. My only condition was that they handle the upkeep and the utilities. Of course, dear, my father had mumbled, staring at his shoes. We'll treat it like it's our own. That was the first lie. The first utility bill that came to my city apartment was for the farmhouse. It was 3 months overdue, with a bright red disconnection notice stapled to it. When I called, my mother answered. Oh, that? We were just so swamped, honey. Connor's new venture's taking up all our energy. Could you just cover it this once? We'll get you back. I paid it, and the next one, and the one after that. It became a silent agreement. I paid the electricity, the water, the gas. A few years in, the property tax bill, a hefty 5-figure sum, was forwarded to me with a frantic note from my mother scribbled on the envelope. They're going to put a lien on the house. We don't have it. I drained a significant portion of my savings and paid it. From then on, the tax bill came directly to me. I was the owner, after all. It was easier that way. Every year the financial bleed deepened, always under the guise of supporting Connor's path. He wasn't a deadbeat. He was a visionary. He wasn't unemployed. He was a consultant. He wasn't failing. He was pivoting. My parents were his full-time enablers, and I was the silent, unwilling investor in their shared delusion. The first venture was dropshipping. Connor spent about $8,000, money I loaned him, on what amounted to cheap plastic junk from overseas. He was going to be the next Jeff Bezos. He spent weeks building a website with a stolen template and then spammed everyone he knew on social media. After 6 months, he had sold exactly 3 items, 2 of them to my mother. The rest of the inventory, hundreds of boxes of phone cases and novelty socks, ended up in the farmhouse attic, right next to Grandma Eleanor's carefully preserved heirlooms. I paid the loan. Then came the crypto phase. This was the one that nearly broke me. He convinced my father to give him $15,000 from his dwindling retirement fund to build a mining rig. He filled the basement with a humming, whining monstrosity of computers and fans that ran 24 hours a day. The electricity bill tripled. It shot up to over $1,000 a month. When I called exasperated, my mother giggled her enforcer's giggle. "Oh, Maggie, don't be so dramatic. This is the future. Connor says we'll all be millionaires in a year. He quotes Elon Musk all the time. He's a genius." The crypto market crashed 6 months later. The $15,000 of my father's money was gone. The mining rig was sold for scrap for about $500, and I was left paying off the credit card debt my parents had racked up to cover the insane utility bills. When I suggested gently that maybe Connor should get a regular job to help out, my mother's voice went cold. "Family backs family, Maggie. Always has. You wouldn't understand. You only have one child to worry about." The insults were always quiet, always couched in concern. My stable career as a head nurse was framed as a lack of ambition. "It's so nice that you have something so steady," my mother would say, implying it was for simple people. My modest but comfortable life was evidence that I didn't dream big like Connor. Every time I achieved something, a promotion, an award for patient care, it was met with polite, vacant smiles before the conversation was immediately steered back to Connor's latest theoretical triumph. I was the invisible wallet, and my success was invisible too. They never asked about my work. They never acknowledged the grueling 12-hour shifts, the life and death decisions, the emotional toll of my profession. They just saw the paycheck that magically appeared to solve their problems. I was a resource, not a person. An ATM, not a daughter. The true sickness of the dynamic became clear with the birth of my son, Leo. I had hoped his arrival would change things, soften the edges. Instead, it just gave them a new way to mark the hierarchy. Leo was my child, and therefore, he was second tier. Every Christmas, the gift disparity was a public performance. My cousin's children would receive lavish, expensive electronics from my parents. Leo would receive a generic, often age-inappropriate toy, clearly purchased at the last minute from a drugstore. One year, he received a broken plastic doll while his cousin Cole got a brand new PlayStation. When I saw Leo's confused, hurt face, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I brought it up to my mother later, as gently as I could. "Oh, it was just a mix-up at the store," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Kids bounce back. Besides, Cole's parents are having a tough time. We wanted to do something special for him." Cole's father was my brother, Connor. The tough time was that his latest scheme, selling NFTs of pixelated animals, had failed to attract any buyers. I was the one who had paid their rent that month, a direct transfer of $3,500. The PlayStation had been purchased with my money, funneled through my parents, and presented as a gift of their love for their favorite son's child. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at the transaction on my banking app and felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. The cut was clean. The worst, the absolute turning point before the final snap, was the PPP loan. During the pandemic, the government offered loans to small businesses to help them stay afloat. Connor, who had never registered a business in his life, decided he was entitled to one. He created a shell company online, a consulting firm, with no clients and no revenue. And for the business address, he used the farmhouse. My farmhouse. He filed the application, claiming he had 4 employees, my parents, himself, and his girlfriend, and received a loan for $110,000. I only found out because a piece of official mail from the Small Business Administration came to my apartment by mistake. My blood ran cold. He had committed federal fraud, using my asset as the home base for his crime. I drove to the farmhouse that day, the letter shaking in my hand. I found the 4 of them in the backyard, having a barbecue. Connor was holding forth about disrupting the legacy financial system. My parents were watching him with expressions of pure adoration. I confronted them. I laid the letter on the picnic table. "What is this, Connor?" He glanced at it and smirked. "That? That's seed money, sis. Free money from the government. You gotta be smart to play the game." "This is fraud," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You used my house as the address. You put this property, Grandma's house, at risk. They can seize assets." My father finally spoke, not looking at me, but at a patch of crabgrass near his foot. Now, Maggie, let's not get hysterical. Connor knows what he's doing. My mother jumped in, her voice sharp. He did it for the family. That money is helping us all. Don't you dare come here and make him feel bad. You're just jealous of his ambition. Jealous. That was the word. They believed I was jealous of a 29-year-old man-child who had never held a real job, who stole from the government, and who lived off his sister's labor while treating her with contempt. I felt a profound sense of clarity in that moment. I wasn't part of their family. I was the foundation they were all standing on, and they were actively trying to dynamite it while expecting me to hold steady. I stayed calm. There was nothing to add. I told them to have the business address changed immediately and to begin paying the loan back. Connor laughed. My mother told me I was being dramatic. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't fix it for them. I let it be. It was a ticking time bomb, and I was quietly distancing myself from the blast radius. Over 11 years, my quiet support had totaled an amount that made me physically ill to calculate. There was the initial $75,000 for a new roof and septic system when they first moved in. There were the property taxes, roughly $7,200 a year for 11 years, totaling $79,200. There was the unspoken monthly stipend to cover utilities and groceries, which started at $500 and crept up to $800 a month, averaging out to roughly $80,000 over the decade. Then there were the loans for Connor's ventures, the $8,000 for drop shipping, the $15,000 for crypto, another $10,000 for an influencer marketing course he never finished. All told, I had poured over $260,000 into that house and the people living in it. That doesn't even account for the lost opportunity of renting it out, which at a conservative rate would have been another $300,000. I had provided them with over $500,000 in housing and direct financial support, and in return, my son was told to eat in the garage, so we returned to Thanksgiving dinner. The smell of sage and roasting turkey thick in the air, the good china, my grandmother's china, gleaming under the dining room lights. Leo's face, which had been bright with excitement just a moment before, crumpled. His lower lip trembled. He looked at me, his eyes wide and swimming with a question he shouldn't ever have to ask. Am I not wanted here? Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. It was the sound of a load-bearing wall finally giving way. The years of being the fixer, the peacekeeper, the invisible wallet, they all fell away. I was no longer a daughter or a sister in that room. I was a mother, and my child had just been wounded. The only thing that mattered was protecting him. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked around the table. At my brother, smug and self-satisfied. At his girlfriend, who was trying to suppress a smirk. At my father, who was now intensely studying the pattern on his plate. And at my mother, who was already composing her excuse. Connor's just stressed, Maggie, she began, a placating smile on her face. His new project is very high pressure. I held up a hand. A small, simple gesture, but it cut her off mid-sentence. The room went dead silent. I turned to my son. I gave him a small, reassuring smile. You know what, buddy? I said, my voice even and clear. Uncle Connor's right. The adults are talking. And I have something to say. I stood up, placing my napkin neatly beside my plate. I looked directly at Connor, then let my gaze sweep across my parents. Thank you for this meal, I said, the words tasting like ash, and for 11 years of hospitality in my house. The color drained from my mother's face. My father's head snapped up. Connor's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Leo, I said, my voice soft again. Go get your coat. We're going home. He didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled off his chair and ran for the entryway. I walked around the table, my footsteps the only sound in the cavernous silence. As I passed my brother, I leaned in close, my voice a whisper only he could hear. Enjoy your dinner. I hope it's a memorable one. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of that dining room, collected my son, and left the house that was mine but had never been my home. The cold November air cut through my sweater, but I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest. It was the heat of a decision made, a line drawn in concrete. The drive home was quiet. Leo sat in his booster seat staring out the window. After a few miles, he spoke, his voice small. "Mommy? Why doesn't Uncle Connor like me?" I reached back and squeezed his hand. "Oh, sweetie," I said, my voice thick for the first time that night. "This has nothing to do with you. You are wonderful. This is about him. He's not a very happy person." "Do they love Cole more than me?" he asked. That was the question that sealed it. I pulled over to the side of the road, put the car in park, and turned to face him fully. "No one could ever love anyone more than I love you," I said, my voice fierce. "And from now on, we are only going to be around people who love you and treat you with respect. That's a promise." He seemed to accept that. He nodded, and we drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. I tucked him into bed, read him an extra chapter of his book, and watched him fall asleep, his face finally relaxed and peaceful. Then I went to my office. I didn't rage. I didn't throw things. I didn't even cry. I opened my laptop. The rage was there, but it was ice cold and efficient. It was a fuel, not a fire. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Farmhouse. Inside were scanned copies of every bill I had ever paid, every property tax receipt, every bank transfer to my parents or Connor, 11 years of meticulous records. I always knew on some level that a day of accounting would come. I spent about an hour drafting an email to my lawyer, a man I had used to set up my will and a trust for Leo. The subject line was simple: eviction and sale of property. I attached the deed, the most recent tax assessment, and a brief, factual summary of the situation. I wrote, "They have been living there rent-free for 11 years under a verbal agreement which they have consistently violated by failing to maintain the property or pay agreed-upon expenses. The verbal lease is now terminated. Please begin the formal eviction process immediately. I want them out in 30 days, as legally required. I also want to sell the property as soon as it is vacant." I hit send. The soft, unmistakable click of the mouse felt like a gavel coming down. The cut was clean. The first call came Friday morning. It was my mother. Her voice was a frantic screech. "Margaret, what is the meaning of this? We got a letter from a lawyer, an eviction notice. This has to be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said calmly, watching a squirrel run across the telephone wire outside my kitchen window. But where will we go? What about your father? What about Connor? This is their home." "It was my home," I corrected her gently. "Grandma Eleanor gave it to me. I have allowed you to live in it. That privilege is now over." "After everything we've done for you," she shrieked. The audacity of that statement was almost breathtaking. I almost laughed. "What is it exactly that you have done for me?" There was a sputtering silence on the other end. "We are your family. We love you." "No," I said, the word falling like a stone into a deep well. "You don't. You love the convenience of me. You love my money. You don't love me, and you don't respect my son. The discussion is over. You have 30 days. I hung up the phone. The barrage began. Dozens of texts. Voicemails filled with tears, then threats, then pleading. My father sent one text. "Please reconsider." "Your mother is distraught." I deleted it. Connor's messages were a special kind of vile. They were typo-riddled screeds of pure, narcissistic rage. "You bitter old hag. You were always jealous of my potential. You'll regret this. I'm going to tell everyone what a monster you are." I read them, each one a confirmation of my decision. It's easier when people show you who they are. I blocked their numbers, all of them. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. They tried to use other family members as flying monkeys. My aunt called, scolding me. "You're tearing this family apart over a childish squabble." Was it childish to tell an 8-year-old to eat with the dogs? I asked. "Well, Connor has a temper. You know that. You have to be the bigger person." "I am," I said. "I am being a big enough person to protect my child from all of you. Do not call me again on their behalf." I hung up. The 30 days passed in a blur of legal correspondence. My lawyer was magnificent. He handled everything, shielding me from their attempts to drag things out. They tried to claim squatters' rights. He shut it down. They tried to claim I had verbally promised them the house. He pointed out that 11 years of me paying every single major bill established a clear landlord-tenant relationship, even without a written lease. On the final day, a moving truck showed up. I didn't go to the property. I had no desire to see them. My lawyer arranged for a sheriff's deputy to be present to ensure the transition was peaceful. The next day, I went to the house for the first time since Thanksgiving. The emptiness was shocking. They had taken everything, including the light fixtures and the copper piping from the basement. The walls were covered in scuffs and gouges from the move. Connor had left his garbage everywhere: broken electronics, bags of clothes, empty pizza boxes. In the middle of the living room floor, someone had used a Sharpie to write a single, vulgar word. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound sense of relief. It was like looking at a tumor that had finally been excised. The house was wounded, but it could be cleaned. It could be healed. I walked through the silent, trashed rooms and felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't losing a family. I was losing a burden. A developer had been trying to buy the land for years. It was a prime piece of real estate, perfect for a new subdivision. My grandmother had always refused. I had refused out of loyalty to a memory, but the house was no longer my grandmother's legacy. It was a monument to my family's dysfunction. I called the developer back. We settled on a price of $670,000. After capital gains taxes and fees, I cleared just over $500,000. The first thing I did was put $200,000 into a secure trust for Leo's education. The second thing I did was buy a smaller, newer house in a quiet neighborhood closer to my work, a place with no history, no ghosts, a place that was just ours. The fallout for my family was swift and brutal. The slow rot began. Without my financial support, their world collapsed. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town. The $110,000 from the fraudulent PPP loan was long gone, spent on a luxury SUV for Connor and other frivolities. My mother, who hadn't worked in 30 years, had to get a job as a cashier at a grocery store. I saw her there once, her face pale and pinched under the fluorescent lights, her hands fumbling with the cash register. She didn't see me. My father, his retirement savings decimated by Connor's schemes, became a greeter at a big box store, forced to smile at strangers all day. And Connor, his empire of delusion crumbled. Without me to fund his ventures and my parents to coddle him, he was forced into the real world. He delivered food for a while, then drove for a rideshare service. His smug superiority was replaced by a sullen, simmering resentment. A few months ago, the federal government finally caught up with him about the PPP loan. With no house to put a lien on, they went after him personally. He was charged with wire fraud. He pleaded guilty and is currently serving an 18-month sentence in a low-security federal prison. The regret was heavier than any debt. I hear these things through the grapevine, from distant relatives who still speak to me. I feel nothing, not joy, not satisfaction, just a quiet, somber finality. They built their own prison long before Connor ever saw the inside of one. I just stopped paying the rent on it. Life for me and Leo is quiet now. It's peaceful. Our new house is filled with laughter. We have movie nights and build enormous Lego castles in the living room. Last Thanksgiving, we didn't have a big feast. We ordered pizza, watched a movie, and fell asleep on the couch together. It was the best Thanksgiving I've ever had. Sometimes I think about that final moment in the old farmhouse, the quiet snap inside my soul. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of profound self-love and maternal protection. It was the moment I finally honored my promise to my grandmother, not just to protect the house, but to protect myself from those who would ruin me. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. It doesn't give anyone the right to your peace, your money, or your spirit. Respect is earned. Loyalty is earned. A place in your child's life is most certainly earned. Some doors have to close, not for revenge, but for survival. They have to be locked, bolted, and barricaded so that new doors, better doors, can finally open. I never regretted a single second. I was finally free.